Hey guys, how are you doing? Laura here. I'm going to tear down a Leaving Cert history essay with you today from the 2015 paper, from the Dictatorship and Democracy question. It's the question there about Hitler's foreign policy. Now you can see here in front of you that I'm going to go through different aspects of the question, so I do recommend you have a read of the entire essay before we get into it, just so it's a bit clearer in your head when I'm talking about different parts of the essay. You will be able to find a fully annotated PDF of the essay on Studyclix later on. So, you'll be able to get a bit more detail on the paragraphs that I don't mention. So let's get into it. Looking firstly at the actual question. You have to make your choice so quick on that day, guys, and you need to be sure that you are clear on all of the things you have to do in relation to the question that you choose. So always look out for the dates. You need to cover the entirety of the dates. In this instance, you need to go all the way up to 1939. Starting off at 1933, but of course you can give some context and talk about before 1933, and indeed you should, but make sure you go all the way up to 1939 at least, maybe a bit in the wider context in your conclusion then as well. The other thing that I want to highlight to you here is make sure you keep the focus on Hitler's foreign policy. I get a little bit worried sometimes when I meet kids after exams and they say, "Oh, it was great, Miss, Hitler came up." Because I refer to these essays sometimes as the Hollywood essays, because everybody knows a bit about Hitler. Everybody knows quite a lot about him, in fact. So when these essays come up, in particular these essays, make sure you're answering the question that is asked of you on the day, that you are looking at the set question, in this instance, his foreign policy. And then that you're not just simply listing everything that he did, that you are then making the link between, okay, this is what he did, and then this is how what he did contributed to the outbreak of World War II. So ask yourself, what did this action create, or did it deepen tensions? Did it create a pact between people? Did it increase, his army and the land at his disposal? Did it increase in his confidence? Did it highlight the weakness of? You know what I mean? Keep going back and asking yourself those questions, and then you are referring to the question that you're being asked on the day. I'd like to just zoom in on the Chief Examiner's report from one particular year before I get into the actual question, just to keep a few things in your head. This Chief Examiner's report mentioned that case studies should not become the exclusive basis for the answering of questions. So remember, make sure that you're focusing on the foreign policy. So you see Hitler, you've learnt off loads about the Nuremberg rallies, and you kind of miss the point and you put down all the information about the Nuremberg rallies, but that's not foreign policy. It's linked, of course, because it helped with, popularity and increasing, army numbers and things like that. But really, it's not very relevant for this question. So be careful there. Make sure you are not simply summarizing everything that you know. Yes, you are telling a story, you are giving a narrative, but remember, look at the final point there. Be prepared to engage in historical argument. So these are all the things that Hitler did. And then how did those things contribute? So give your opinion, make an argument, scrutinize the evidence that you have given. This is how all of these things contributed to, leading into World War II. This is what it increased. This is what it allowed for. This is why it brought confidence to somebody. This is why it deepened divisions and mistrust, etc., etc. Engage in historical argument. Does this essay do that? And for the most part, by and large, it really does. It's an excellent essay. The introduction is excellent in its setting of the scene. It gives great context, particularly here about the Treaty of Versailles and the issues in Germany after World War I. It's dealt with really, really well here. It gives a simple opening sentence rephrasing the question. I like the use of adjectives like aggressive, Hitler's aggressive foreign policy during the period blah de blah. You're giving an opinion there. You're making an argument. You're saying that his foreign policy was aggressive. I know it seems obvious and it seems very simple, but using those adjectives is helping you make an argument. You're giving an opinion. There's great expression and language used in this essay. This person has great control of what they're trying to say. It's very clear the argument that they are making. I am kind of nitpicking here, but I do love when an intro kind of maps out your approach to the question. So, for example, at the end of that introduction, you could have something like, I am going to analyse how the pacts that Hitler made and how he created Lebensraum all, all contributed to the outbreak of World War Two. Do you know? Just a little bit of a map or a plan for yourself. One more sentence is all I'm looking for there. The first paragraphs I'm going to look at specifically are paragraphs 1 and 2. Some of the things I want to point out to you here. At the start of paragraph 1 and 2, it talks about Hitler's relationship with the League of Nations. And it's a pretty complicated episode and a pretty complicated event, and it's summarised really well here. Good control. This person knows their stuff. And then they go on to talk about how he immediately pulled Germany from the League of Nations. And that's just, for me, a slight missed opportunity for them to explore the implications of this and how that action, in relation to Hitler's foreign policy, contributed to World War II. Explore him pulling out of the League of Nations. What did it allow him to do? What did it give him the freedom to do? And then ultimately that, is part of him, leading into World War II. A couple of sentences on that there would really give it polish. They do refer back to the question at the end of this paragraph quite nicely. This pact made Hitler look like a man of peace and lulled Europe into a sense of false security. Good awareness of the question and the argument that you are making. This is the first thing I'm talking about, and the effect of it is that it lulled Europe into a false sense of security. Remember, your Leaving Cert history essays are not just separate chunks of information. They should knit together or be linked together seamlessly. And in this instance, the paragraphs could be really easily linked. For example, at the start of that second paragraph there, you could have the next main event in 1934, the Prime Minister, blah, blah, blah. You could have a really simple little linking phrase there. Find your own language and your own way to do it, but do try to use those linking phrases a little bit more. In saying that, there is extremely relevant and extensive knowledge displayed in this paragraph about that Dollfuss affair. This essay is giving exactly what the examiner would be looking for: detailed, substantial information. It's continued down the way in paragraphs 5 and 6. Again, those linking phrases would really, really give it that extra oomph. But it does continue to show great control. In relation to the Rhineland, you have loads of information, I've no doubt, on what happened in the remilitarizing of the Rhineland. And you could write a whole page about it. But you only need to pluck out the key facts as they are needed for this particular question. And this paragraph is a great example of that. Just plucking out what's needed to make your argument sound. I would love if this essay explained appeasement. It is mentioned, but it could be explained a little bit more. Because appeasement obviously is one of the main things that leads to the outbreak of World War II. So what is it in Hitler's foreign policy that made Britain and France particularly appease him? What exactly does that mean? And then that allows for him to do something else and do something else and do something else, and then World War II breaks out. So just make sure you do give a definition of the policy of appeasement. But in saying that, I do love the language there. It was bold choices like this that led to the outbreak of World War II. There's a lovely narrative kind of storytelling style in this particular essay. They're using the language of the set question to engage in historical argument, as is pointed out to you on the Chief Examiner's report that I previously mentioned. Watch out for those things. Make sure you are including them not only at the end of your paragraphs, but also pepper them into your paragraphs across your essay. The next paragraph deals with Hitler uniting all German-speaking peoples under this one great empire that, and his taking over of Austria. And again, the detailed information is there. It's absolutely perfect, but it just could be made a little bit clearer why this is relevant to this specific question. For example, at the end of that paragraph there, it says the results show that the Austrian people approved of German control of their country. It was kind of rigged, but that's fine. So you could just add in a final sentence there, something like Hitler now had more land and soldiers at his disposal, making World War II even more likely. Or something like that. Just make the link back to the question that little bit more explicit. The final thing, obviously, I'm going to speak about, guys, is the conclusion. Now, you can see straight away, after such an amazingly meaty essay, the conclusion is a little bit too thin. The 2 sentences aren't really enough. It needs to be a little bit stronger. It is a good summation of everything that has been argued up to this point. It's and summarising, a very meaty 4 or 5 page essay is not an easy thing to do. So that's good, but it needs a little bit more. What I would advise is refer to some of the specific events, some of those specific aggressive policies, such as the Rome-Berlin Axis, such as the Nazi-Soviet Pact, such as the taking over of the Sudetenland. You could just mention a few specific things that gave Hitler confidence that then, allowed for World War II. And then, of course, place these actions into a wider context is really important for your conclusion as well. Ultimately, these things started World War II, but of course, his speed and arrogance and his overconfidence really ultimately lead to his downfall and the division of Germany and the Cold War. You could just kind of point out what happens after all of this aggressive foreign policy that you have explained so well in the previous pages. Place it all in that wider context, and that would really polish up this essay and make it really, really outstanding. So that brings me to the end of this particular essay breakdown, guys. I hope you found it helpful. And remember, you can find the full essay analysed on Studyclix if you'd like specific detail on the other paragraphs that I didn't mention today. And I hope to talk to you all again. Bye bye.